one that didn't cost Ukraine 1.1 million dead soldiers. Come up with a better solution, you idiots. I mean, I spit in the face of these people. Oh, you allowed a war to go on to kill 1.1 million Ukrainian soldiers. You allowed it. You made it happen. Russia didn't want this. Russia did everything to avoid this. You in the West made this happen. Shoot the dog.
The staggering claim, 1.1 million dead Ukrainian soldiers, a number so massive, so horrifying, that it almost defies belief. And yet, Ritter lays the blame squarely at the feet of the West, accusing them of orchestrating this catastrophe, of fueling the war, of forcing Ukraine into a relentless meat grinder. Not Russia, he says, but the West. A brutal accusation, one that turns the entire narrative on its head. But is there truth to it? Or is this just another distortion of reality? As we shift our focus from the analysis of Scott Ritter, a new geopolitical landscape is taking shape, one that could redefine the future of the Ukraine war and the broader relationship between the West and Russia. Overnight, significant diplomatic developments have unfolded, hinting at a potential shift in how global powers are approaching the conflict. French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to the U.S. and his unexpected remarks following discussions with Donald Trump have raised eyebrows, suggesting that Western leaders may be warming up to the idea of renewed negotiations with Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, Russia is pressing forward with its final push on the battlefield, making strategic territorial advances while leveraging the uncertainty surrounding Ukraine's leadership. At the center of it all, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky finds himself in an increasingly precarious position, facing both internal and external pressures that could determine the fate of his country. Let's break down these critical developments and what they mean for the ongoing war. In a move that caught many by surprise, Emmanuel Macron has hinted at the necessity of re-establishing diplomatic contact with Vladimir Putin. His meeting with former U.S. President Donald Trump was initially expected to solidify Western backing for Ukraine, ensuring that military aid and financial support would continue under a potential second Trump administration. However, the outcome was far from what Kyiv had hoped for. Instead of reaffirming unwavering support, Macron acknowledged the need for renewed dialogue with Russia, stating that any peace agreement should not be seen as Ukraine's defeat, but must be backed by strong, long-term security guarantees. This shift in rhetoric signals a potential fracture in the Western coalition, with some leaders exploring diplomatic solutions rather than continuing the war effort indefinitely. Adding to the complexity, Donald Trump himself made several key statements during the meeting that indicate a strategic pivot. Notably, he expressed no objection to European nations deploying peacekeeping troops in Ukraine. This suggestion, while seemingly in support of Ukraine, could also be a step towards freezing the conflict rather than actively supporting Ukraine's push to reclaim occupied territories. Trump further emphasized his willingness to meet with Zelensky in the coming days, not to discuss military strategies or aid, but specifically to sign a mineral deal. This signals a transactional approach, suggesting that the U.S. under Trump could prioritize economic interests over military engagement. Perhaps the most significant revelation was Trump's willingness to consider a diplomatic visit to Moscow at the right time, with May 9th being ruled out as too early. This statement, combined with Macron's softened stance, underscores a potential realignment in Western policy, one that moves towards negotiations with Russia rather than an indefinite continuation of the war. For Ukraine, this presents a dire challenge. If key Western leaders, particularly from the U.S. and France, begin shifting towards diplomacy, Kyiv may find itself increasingly isolated in its fight against Russian aggression. Further complicating matters, the United States made a significant diplomatic gesture toward Russia by refusing to support an anti-Russian draft resolution at the United Nations General Assembly. Instead, a U.S.-led resolution calling for an end to the war, without explicitly blaming Russia, was passed with support from China and Russia, while key European nations such as the United Kingdom and France abstained. This marked a notable setback for Ukraine on the international stage. The absence of direct condemnation of Russia sends a clear message. Some global powers are willing to move towards a negotiated settlement, even if it doesn't hold Russia fully accountable for its invasion. As these diplomatic maneuvers unfold, Vladimir Putin has seized the opportunity to frame Zelensky as the sole obstacle to peace. In his latest statements, Putin claimed that both Russia and the U.S. are interested in ending the war as quickly as possible, but that Zelensky's refusal to engage in negotiations is preventing a resolution. He pointed out that Zelensky's approval ratings have plummeted and that his decision to ban negotiations with Russia, solidified by a presidential decree, has boxed him into a corner. According to Russian narratives, Zelensky is clinging to power by prolonging the war under martial law. Knowing that lifting these restrictions could lead to elections he is unlikely to win. These claims align with speculation from certain factions within Trump's political circle, who believe that a change in Ukrainian leadership could facilitate a peace deal. While Trump has not openly endorsed replacing Zelensky, some of his close advisors reportedly see this as a necessary step to end the war on terms favorable to both Washington and Moscow. If this perspective gains traction, Zelensky could face increased pressure from the U.S. to reconsider his stance or even step aside in favor of a more compliant successor. Meanwhile, the battlefield situation remains fluid, with Russia continuing its offensives despite ongoing diplomatic shifts. Russian forces have made strategic advances in multiple regions, employing a more cautious but methodical approach compared to their previous high-casualty assaults. In the northern Sumy region, Russian troops have reportedly gained control over key settlements near the border, with the aim of severing Ukrainian supply routes and encircling defensive positions. Heavy clashes are ongoing around key transport arteries, as Russian forces attempt to push deeper into Ukrainian territory. Further south, in the Kharkiv and Luhansk regions, Russian units have improved their positions along major roadways, signaling a potential push towards deeper penetration into Ukrainian defenses. Missile strikes have intensified in the Sloviansk and Kramatorsk regions, targeting Ukrainian military installations and supply depots. These strikes are intended to weaken Ukraine's ability to sustain its frontline defenses, paving the way for further Russian advances in the coming weeks. On the southern front, Russian forces have reportedly gained ground near the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions, taking advantage of bad weather conditions that limit Ukrainian drone and artillery capabilities. Recent videos from Russian sources show their troops advancing along the Dnipro River, establishing footholds closer to key strategic points. This suggests that despite diplomatic overtures, Russia is still fully committed to achieving battlefield objectives before any serious negotiations take place. In the eastern Donetsk region, intense battles continue around the city of Pokrovsk. Russian military analysts suggest that Ukraine may soon attempt a counteroffensive in this area to reclaim lost ground, but Russian forces are actively fortifying their positions in anticipation of such an attack. If Ukraine fails to push Russian troops back, it could result in further territorial losses that would weaken its bargaining position in future peace talks. Looking ahead, perhaps the most critical moment will come in May 2025, when Zelensky will have to decide whether to extend martial law for another 90 days. If he does, it could prolong Ukraine's internal struggles, further isolating him from Western allies who may prefer a negotiated settlement. If he lifts martial law, it could pave the way for elections. But with his approval ratings at historic lows, this could lead to a leadership change that dramatically alters Ukraine's trajectory. As all these factors converge, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The geopolitical landscape surrounding the Ukraine war is shifting. The cracks in Western unity are starting to show, with key figures like Macron and Trump exploring pathways to negotiation rather than continued military engagement. Russia, sensing an opportunity, is pushing forward both militarily and diplomatically, framing Zelensky as the primary roadblock to peace. For Ukraine, the months ahead could prove to be the most critical yet, as it navigates both battlefield realities and the changing political winds in Washington and Europe. As we take a step back and examine the bigger picture, it's clear that the Ukraine war is entering a decisive phase, one where military actions on the ground are now deeply intertwined with shifting geopolitical priorities among the world's most powerful nations. What we are witnessing is a slow but undeniable realignment in the West's approach to the war. While Kiev continues to emphasize military resistance and the need for unwavering support, key Western leaders are subtly but unmistakably shifting towards diplomacy, even if it means engaging with Putin directly. Macron's statements, Trump's transactional approach, and the recent UN resolution all indicate that certain Western powers are no longer fully committed to a long-term, full-scale Ukrainian victory. Instead, they appear to be preparing the groundwork for some form of negotiated settlement, one that may not be ideal for Ukraine, but one that Western leaders see as necessary to avoid prolonged military and economic strain. If this trend continues, Ukraine could soon find itself in a precarious position, where it must either fight an increasingly uphill battle with reduced Western aid or accept a compromise that may leave parts of its territory in Russian hands. Zelensky, for his part, is in a difficult situation. His leadership has been defined by his defiant stance against Russia, his refusal to negotiate, and his ability to rally Western support. But with his approval ratings falling and the war dragging on without a decisive breakthrough, he is facing growing challenges both domestically and internationally. If he continues to resist negotiations while the West starts leaning towards diplomacy, he risks losing crucial allies. If he agrees to talks under pressure, he risks political backlash at home. Either way, his next moves will determine not just his own political future, but the fate of Ukraine itself. Meanwhile, Russia is capitalizing on these developments. Militarily, it is pushing forward with strategic advances, methodically wearing down Ukrainian defenses. Diplomatically, it is painting Zelensky as the main obstacle to peace, a narrative that is beginning to gain traction, especially among those in the West who are seeking an off-ramp from the war. Putin understands that time may be on his side. If he can maintain pressure on the battlefield while Western resolve weakens, he might secure a settlement that legitimizes at least some of Russia's territorial gains. The next few months will be critical. Will Ukraine manage to hold the line and convince the West to double down on military aid? Or will Western nations push for a peace process that forces Kyiv into difficult concessions? Will Trump, if elected, move forward with direct negotiations with Putin? And if martial law is lifted in Ukraine, could we see a major shift in its leadership that changes the entire trajectory of the war? One thing is certain, the situation is evolving rapidly, and the consequences of these decisions will shape global politics for years to come. What do you think? Is the West slowly abandoning Ukraine, or is this just another phase in the conflict? Will Zelensky be forced to negotiate, or will Ukraine continue fighting against the odds? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your perspective. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. We'll be following this situation closely and bringing you the latest insights as they unfold. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.